Good day everyone. We are the Group 4 to discuss about the Chapter 15, which is Women and Violence. To start the topic, what is violence against women? So, violence against women is an issue that have only been talked about recently. To be exact, VOW was placed in the agenda at the early 1980s. Compare it to the amount of time that has passed when women have been subjected to harm, it truly is recent. Even the Philippines have its own fair share of VOW in our history. To give an example, during the Japanese occupation of the Philippines during the Second World War, the Japanese army established a system of sexual slavery wherein more than 1,000 women, some even underage, were imprisoned and treated as sexual objects.
VOW strikes at the personhood of women, says the Philippine Commission on Women. Violence against women is a specific form of violence that attacks persons at their core, their gender. It also has physical and emotional effects on women. In some countries, it is so ingrained that violence committed against women does not seem like real violence. In most societies across the globe, acts that comprise violence against women may be seen as a norm because a woman deserved what happened to her or because the oppression has been normalized. Further information about violence against women includes VOW happens most often behind closed doors. It was so widespread that women's shelters for victims of domestic violence were popularized during the 1960s. Incidents concerning violence against women overlap with other women's issues such as issues regarding work, sexual harassment in work, education, sexual harassment, rape, and family life like incest, spousal abuse, female genital mutilation. Former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan shares that violence against women is perhaps the most shameful human rights violation. It knows no boundaries of geography, culture, or wealth. As long as it continues, we cannot claim to be making real progress towards equality, development, and peace. Defining violence against women. The Magna Carta of Women in the Philippines defines VOW as any act of gender-based violence that results in or is likely to result in physical, sexual, or psychological harm or suffering to women, including threats of such acts, coercion, or arbitrary deprivation of liberty, and whether occurring in public or in private life. Violence against women may be one of the first crimes committed against a person because of their gender. It is rooted in the unequal relationships and structuralized oppression against women. VOW is an attack on a woman's gender. Alternatively, violence against men is not as widespread because of their socially constructed roles as men, or because they possess specific physical features that intimidate others from committing the violence. Violence against men, simply for the reason of humiliating the male gender, does not occur as much as the hostility experienced by women.
The following are the types of violence against women. First is the physical violence. It is the most detectable and common form of VOW. It involves causing physical or bodily harm against another person. Second is a psychological violence. It involves causing harm to a victim through the use of emotional manipulation, resulting in mental suffering. Some forms of psychological violence includes the following: repeated verbal abuse, diminishing her value because her socially constructed role, stalking or harassment, deprivation of a woman's right to see her child, and many more. The third is economic abuse or violence. It is a deprivation of women's financial independence. This form of abuse includes the following: explicit acts such as denying women the right to use property or materials that are legally hers, solely controlling her money or property, threatening or to deprive her of financial support, stopping her from creating her own income, generating, protect, and many more. The fourth is a sexual violence. It's defined as the forcing of unwanted sexual acts upon a person. Any act that is sexual in nature must be considered sexual violence. This violence ranges from rape. Rape is defined as a forced or coerced penetration of the vulva or anus using a penis, other body parts, or an object. rape is considered rape even if the penetration is minimal. Unsuccessful rape is called attempted rape. If more than one person commits rape or on any one person, it is called gang rape. Marital rape includes acts that are covered by rape, although it occurs between a married couple. While this form of violence is recognized by the law or the anti-rape law of 1997, there are cultural barriers to its full implementation. Next is the incest. Refers to sexual acts done between family members or closely related persons. Victims may feel that they must fulfill the elder's wish or sexual acts for survival because the latter is taking care of them. Victims may also keep silent to keep the peace in their family or community. The fifth type of vow is a cultural practice of sexual violence, such as child bride. It involves children younger than 18 years old and they are often forced to have sexual encounters. Next is a female genital mutilation or the female circumcision. It involves the cutting or removal of certain parts of a woman's external vagina and may bring harm to women. Next is a sexual harassment. It is a specific form of sexual violence that occurs outside one's home. Manipulation, intimidation, and blackmail can be used to coerce someone into having sex or performing sexual acts. According to the UN Women Watch, as a list of possible acts of sexual harassment. This includes the following below, which is classified into verbal incident and non-verbal incident. Another is a physical harassment. It involves touching a person's hair or clothing, hugging, kissing, or stroking, or patting a person's body, rubbing oneself sexually against a person, standing close, or brushing against a person. The next type of vow is a violence against women in public spaces. It includes street harassment. Street harassment is a sexual harassment that occurs in a public space. A prior relationship between the assailant and the victim is not required. It involves catcalls, shouting or of sexual obscenities, unwanted sexual gestures, and many more. Another type of vow includes pornography, prostitution, sexual slavery, and sex trafficking. Pornography is defined as the representation through publication, exhibition, cinematography, and decent shows, information technology, or by whatever means of a person engaged in real or simulated explicit sexual activities or any representation of the sexual parts of a person for primarily sexual purposes. Prostitution also is defined as any act, transaction, scheme, or design involving the use of a person by another for sexual intercourse or lascivious conduct in exchange for money, profit, or any other consideration. The third one is the sexual exploitation. It is the participation of a woman in the sex industry, prostitution, or pornography because of a force or intimidation. The last one is the sex trafficking. It involves the relocation of women from one place to another without them knowing where they are going. These women often agree to go to these places because they have been promised employment by a legitimate employer. Another type of vow is a spiritual violence. Spiritual force is a form of violence against women that uses religion or spirituality to discredit, harm, or disempower them. It happens when the powerful religious leaders are supposedly religious ideologies to control and rule over women. Also, the other forms of violence against women includes the reproductive or medical abuse. It is less known forms of vow have to do with the issues related to having or not having children. Women may be forced to get pregnant, use contraceptives, or undergo abortion. Also, it includes abuse of women in intimate relationship. It is seen as a major health issue that affects a woman physically and emotionally. It also causes psychosocial harm. Women who are abused by their partners are called victims of intimate violence or abuse. Also, the domestic violence, it is violence occurs within a home where an unequal power relationship between the victim and the perpetrator exists. This form of vow may occur in relationships between husband and wife, father or mother and child, aunt or relative, and many more, which may lead children with behavioral problems, children who end up in the streets, and children who are more likely to be trafficked.
The impacts of violence against women influences how they participate in the public sphere. The high cost in the treating of victims of vow are associated with physical treatment, therapy, shelters, training for advocates against vow, and the prosecution of the perpetrators. Health consequences. VOW is a global phenomenon deeply rooted in certain cultures. VOW has a long-term and short-term effects on the woman physically, emotionally, and sexually. It can lead to unwanted pregnancies, unwanted miscarriages, sexual transmitted disease, and other sexual and reproductive health issues. Women who experience VOW may develop mental health problems such as a post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD, eating disorders, sleep disorders, and the like. These issues may have physical manifestations such as migraine, pains in the various parts of one's body, limited mobility, and other health issues. Women who are victims of sexual abuse and violence may likewise take the harmful adaptive measure to compensate for the undressed trauma such as smoking and drug abuse, as well as a risky sexual behavior. The cause of AWIR, abuse of women intimate relationship, is the high on children. A woman in an abusive relationship while pregnant has a higher chance of miscarriage or death during childbirth. Children who witness AWIR are at risk of maltreatment, sexual abuse, and domestic violence. The victims and the witnesses of AWIR are equally at the risk of mental health issues, anxiety, depression, and low self-esteem. Their physical health may suffer and may be prone to difficulty performing in social. If children witness VOW and see it as a norm, they may become victims or perpetrators themselves when they grow older.
So now here are the laws on VOW. But before that, what is Republic Act 9262? Republic Act 9262 is known as the Anti-Violence Against Women and Their Children Act of 2004, recognizing the need to protect the family and its members, particularly women and children, from violence against threats to their personal safety and security. RA 9262 was signed by former President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo on March 8, 2004. So here are the 5 laws created to address different forms of VOW. The first one is the Anti-Sexual Harassment Act of 1995. Under RA 7877, sexual harassment at work, in education, or during training is defined as committed by an employer, employee, manager, supervisor, agent of the employer, teacher, instructor, professor, coach, trainer, or any other person who, having authority, influence, or moral ascendancy over another in a work, training, or educational environment, demands, requests, or otherwise requires any sexual favor from the other, regardless of whether the demand, request, or requirement for submission is made in a sexually, and the consequences are anyone who breaches the legislation may be sentenced to a term of imprisonment of not less than 1 month, nor more than 6 months, a fine of not less than 10,000 pesos, or nor more than 20,000 pesos, or at the court's discretion, both such a fine and imprisonment. Any action brought by a violation of these Act's provisions must be resolved within 3 years. Next is the Anti-Rape Act of 1997. The Anti-Rape Law of 1997 redefines rape as, number 1, a crime against person. The law considers that any person, whether a prostituted person, non-virgin, or one who has an active sexual life, may be victimized by rape. Second one is a public offense. Anyone who has knowledge of the crime may file a case on the victim's behalf. The prosecution continues even if the victim drops the case or pardons the offender, and the guilty can be punished depending on the act itself and the circumstances surrounding it. Reclusion perpetua, imprisonment from 20 to 40 years, is imposed on the offender if rape is committed through sexual intercourse. And prison mayor, imprisonment from 6 to 12 years is imposed on the offender if rape was committed through oral or anal sex or through the use of any object or instruments that was inserted into the mouth or anal orifice of the woman or a man. Next is the Rape Victims Assistance Act of 1998. It establishes rape crisis centers in every province and municipality to provide counseling, free legal assistance, and ensure the privacy and safety of rape survivors. Next is the Anti-Mail Order Bride Law of 1998. It is governing the practice of matching specifically Filipino women for marriage to foreign nationals using mail, advertisement, publication, printing or distribution of brochures, flyers, and other propaganda materials. Any person found guilty by the court to have violated any of the acts herein prohibited shall suffer an imprisonment of not less than 6 years and 1 day, but not more than 8 years, and a fine of not less than 8,000 pesos, but not more than 20,000 pesos. Provided that if the offender is a foreigner, he shall be immediately deported and barred forever from entering the country after serving his sentence and payment of fine. And the last one is the Anti-Trafficking in Persons Act of 2000. It aims to eliminate and punish human trafficking, especially women and children, establishing the necessary institutional mechanisms for the protection and support of trafficked persons. It aims to promote human dignity, protect the people from any threat of violence and exploitation, and mitigate pressures for involuntary migration and servitude of persons, not only to support trafficked persons, but more than importantly, to ensure their recovery, rehabilitation, and reintegration into the mainstream of society. Any persons found guilty of committing attempted theft shall be penalized with imprisonment of 15 years and a fine of not less than 500,000 but not more than 1 million pesos.
Now on to prevention and response. As a response to the growing issue of violence against women, the government has taken steps to prevent such things from happening. As mentioned by the reporters before me, there have been laws passed for this matter. Examples of such laws are the Anti-Rape Law or the RA 8353, the Anti-Violence Against Women and Their Children Act of 2004, RA 9262, and the Republic Act number 11313 or the Safe Spaces Act, more known as the Bawal Bastos Act. Bawal Bastos Law, which covers all forms of gender-based sexual harassment committed in public spaces, educational or training institutions, workplace, and online space. Now on to preventions and responses. So, as a response, VAU desk at the barangay or village level has been put into effect. Next is the operationalization of school-based comprehensive sexuality education under the mandate of the National Responsible Parenthood and the Reproductive Health Law. Next is the celebration of the National Women's Month from March 1 to 31, which includes wellness programs, medical and dental services, livelihood bazaars, and women's forums. More to this is the recent GAD webinar series, which was prevalent during the COVID season. Next is the 18-day campaign to end VAU. And lastly, for preventions and response, our government's DSWD's implementation of programs and interventions that may be provided to victims or survivors of abuse. This includes psychosocial care, psychosocial counseling, psychological and psychiatric tests, provision of professional health services, referral for medical legal examination, provision of mechanisms for protection from mental, emotional, physical, and sexual abuse, and other forms of exploitation. This also includes provision of clothing and personal items, legal and paralegal assistance, and referral or transfer to any DSWD, LGU, or registered facility for temporary shelter or protective custody. Examples of these facilities are the Marilac Hills and the Haven for Women located in the National Capital Region. If ever you're in need of help, these are the helplines that are available in Aklan.